And for me, it was the flexibility. And so that's when I decided to take that entrepreneurial plunge. And I tried a few different ideas off the side of my desk, but ultimately decided to buy a business. And that allowed me not to have to start from scratch, but rather move into something that was already established, had a bit of a track record already, and allowed me to put my arms around something that already existed and then shape it based on my experience, my expertise. Absent having your own intellectual property, you can be very commoditized, or you can seem very commoditized to the people that you're trying to serve. And a book serves a couple of purposes. One, it helps you to clarify what it is that is distinct and differentiated and put some structure around that.
Welcome to the Employee to Entrepreneur channel. Please subscribe so every week you get to hear from amazing guests that share their stories and inspiration and motivation to help them in their journey, and hopefully it will inspire you as well in your transition from employee to entrepreneur. Welcome everybody to this episode of Transitioning from Employee to Entrepreneur. I am so excited about this guest and all the things he's going to share, because a lot of people, including myself, have thought, wow, it'd be so cool to be an author one day, right? Have a book, a New York bestseller, be on that list, and just in general, be an author. How cool would it be to have that artifact that you could say is yours, that you created? Today, our guest speaker is Scott Macmillan, and I am so excited because he really wrote the book on entrepreneur to author. How great is that? And we're going to hear from him a little bit more around the strategies and why possibly being an author would be amazing for your entrepreneurial journey, where we're going to get to when do you do it, when's the right time, what you need to think about, and all that good stuff. So I'm super excited about this particular episode. As always, amazing guests. Scott, thank you so much for being with us today. You yourself are an employee to entrepreneur. And I'm really excited for you to share a little bit about your story. And then we're going to dive a little bit more into some of the things that I think our audience is really going to appreciate. So I'm going to throw it over to you to share a little bit more about your background, your story, and how did you actually become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, and Anita, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And yeah, you're right. I spent the bulk of my career in the corporate world, and it's a fairly recent thing for me to be an entrepreneur. I made that transition, I guess it's about 7 years ago now. It's not brand new, but in the scope of my entire career, it is fairly new. Going way back, I actually started my career in animation. I was trained as a graphic designer and then worked on a number of kids' animated shows, 3D animated shows like Roly Poly Oly and Backyardigans and all of these really fun kid shows. And as I progressed in that business, I found myself more and more drawn into the business side of media and entertainment. And I felt terribly ill-equipped for that because I was trained more on the artistic side. And I decided to go back to school and get my MBA and learn some of the skills that I thought that I was lacking. And what I realized was a lot of that stuff can be learned as you go on the job. What business school gave me was really just the confidence that I knew what I knew and I knew what I didn't know, and I developed the ability to find things out that I needed to know. On the back of that, I ended up spending a number of years in management consulting, further learning the skills of the trade, so to speak, on the strategic side. And then coming out of that experience, I worked at a large Canadian media company. No secret, Rogers Media was where I worked, and I was head of strategy there for a number of years, working in a variety of different media disciplines like publishing and radio, television, sports. Around the 2017, 2017, my son was born. And I think, like a lot of people who are making the choice to leave the corporate world and enter into the world of entrepreneurship, for me, what led me down that path was when our son was born in 2017. And
Your life changed. It's often a pivotal moment to
it really is
life, right? COVID did
Yeah.
a lot of people, being a parent, getting a divorce, like any one of these seem to be such a catalyst for making this monumental shift in how we think.
That's totally true, right? It really does shift your perspective and forces you to think about what is it that's important. And for me, it was the flexibility. And so that's when I decided to take that entrepreneurial plunge. And I tried a few different ideas off the side of my desk, but ultimately decided to buy a business. And that allowed me not to have to start from scratch, but rather move into something that was already established, had a bit of a track record already, and allowed me to put my arms around something that already existed and then shape it based on my experience, my expertise. And so that was my business, Grammar Factory, that I acquired in 2019. And that's the business that I've been running ever since. We help entrepreneurs and business leaders write and publish books that help build their authority, position them in the market, and help them ultimately achieve their business goals.
That's fantastic. As I said, I'm really excited about this because I have a book in me, just like I'm sure all the people who are listening.
Don't we all, right?
Don't we all, right? You actually wrote one, so we will get into a little bit more of why you wrote it, and we'll dive deep a little bit more into some of the things you've said. But let's get off the bat with, for some people, and maybe not everybody, those that are transitioning from employee to entrepreneur, can you just walk through why or how a book could even accelerate that transition and create credibility faster than maybe traditional marketing? And is there, just right off the bat, because I don't want someone who's in a job and dabbling with this part-time going, I was listening to podcasts and Scott said I should go and write a book first. That's the first thing I do. So can you walk through a little bit more about, is it a good idea for someone transitioning? Why is it a good idea? And when is that timeline? And then we're going to go into a little bit more nitty-gritties.
Yeah, it's a really important question because writing a book is, on the one hand, it's not as hard as a lot of people think, but it's also not easy, right? It takes a commitment in a few ways. It requires that you put the thinking time in to make sure that you're writing the right book. And then, of course, it takes time to write that book and ultimately get it published. And it's not the kind of thing that you want to jump into just because you heard me on a podcast, though that's not a bad reason to start considering it. But look, what a book can do, particularly for somebody who is moving into that role as an entrepreneur, is it can do a few things. It can, on the personal side, it can really help you to clarify your thinking and to codify your intellectual property. And that's something that's incredibly helpful when you're first starting out in a business, particularly if that business is a knowledge-based business. What you're doing is providing your expertise in some form of service to your clients. Absent having your own intellectual property, you can be very commoditized, or you can seem very commoditized to the people that you're trying to serve. And a book serves a couple of purposes. One, it helps you to clarify what it is that is distinct and differentiated and put some structure around that. A book is a bit of a forcing mechanism to do that. And then once the book is published, it also serves that same purpose for your target clients. It differentiates you from others that are in the market, and it allows your prospective clients to spend a little bit of time with you and understand your point of view and your perspective on your topic area, so that when you're having sales conversations with them, for example, they're already 4 or 5 hours into that conversation before you even are directly talking to them. Those are a couple of things that can be really helpful in terms of positioning you in the market, whether that's early on in your entrepreneurship journey or a little bit later as well.
Okay, great. So you wouldn't say that somebody should be in their business for like years before they actually should write a book or could write a book. You could say that it could be anywhere in your journey as long as it's a service-based, especially maybe if there is not enough clarity around what you want to do. And this way, by writing the outline of a manuscript, you now have clarity on what you're doing anyway.
That's exactly right. And the important thing, as with most things, is knowing what your goals are for it and having realistic expectations about what the book is going to do. So early on in that entrepreneurial journey, the goal really is about codifying your IP and positioning you in the marketplace, because you probably don't have a huge audience just waiting for your book to be launched that are going to rush out and buy it on day one. And so that's probably not a realistic goal for most first-time authors, particularly if they're early in the entrepreneurship journey. But it's really great for that positioning and codifying of IP. Later on in your entrepreneurial journey, once you've established a client base and an audience, You may have tens of thousands of followers on various social media networks. And so when you launch your book into that, it's a very different outcome because you're publishing into a platform that you've already built. So having an understanding of what are the assets that you're dealing with from a business perspective, what are you publishing the book into, what are the goals that you're trying to achieve from your book, and being realistic about what that book is going to accomplish. If you have the right point of view on that, then you can do that early on versus doing that later on in the entrepreneurial journey, and both of those can work.
Yeah, okay, I totally understand. So what would you say, based on all that, is usually the number one mistake that a new entrepreneur makes in thinking about writing a book then?
Yeah, not only a new entrepreneur, but even veteran entrepreneurs, the biggest mistake is publishing the book and then checking the box and moving on to the next thing. It's terribly common. I think partly because for a lot of people, writing a book feels like a bucket list item where they've always wanted to write a book. And once they've got that written and it's in the market, they're like, okay, I feel really good about this. Now, what's my next project? A lot of us are A-type personalities that just want to move on to the next thing. But the real power of the book comes not from it just being in the market, but how you then use that to open up opportunities for you, commercial opportunities, whether that's speaking engagements or media appearances, whatever it is, opportunities to work with particular clients, getting the book into the hands of the people that need to read it, who then you want to work with. That's the way that you get the return on investment of time and resources for your book. So the mistake that people make is just publishing it out into the ether and thinking that it's this magic bullet that's going to solve all of their problems and they don't have to do anything else.
Yeah, actually, I'm sure, me included, I'll admit that. I think a lot of people just think that I've said it and I posted on my social media and boom, I'm an expert now. I have a book written.
Yeah.
Will just miraculously become a bestseller because
That's right.
I'm so knowledgeable.
That's the risk.
So yeah, that's a really interesting foresight because like for me, I would have thought the mistake was more of it not being either well written or not really clear on the goal or whatnot. But it's so true. I think the time that it takes in the bucket list of going, I did it, I wrote a book, and yay me, but then not actually doing anything with it and not really promoting it is such an interesting mindset around. But I guess it's like anything, any artifact that you create, anything. If you're spending the time, it requires constant publicity and moving forward with that.
You can imagine coming up with an amazing product in your business that's never been thought of before, and you're really excited about it. You've spent all sorts of time developing it, and once it's developed, it sits on your desk. You never talk about it. You never promote it to people. It doesn't mean that it's not a great product, but you're not going to make many sales on it. And the same thing's true of a book. Even though for a lot of people, the sale of the book as a retail product isn't the goal, you still need to put that out into the market in some fashion to attract the business that you want to attract using your book. And your point about other potential mistakes around that is not well written, that's a risk that is very manageable. The important thing is that the book has a novel perspective, that your ideas are reflective of the quality of the work that you do with people or that you plan to do with people if you're starting early on this journey. But the quality of the writing, that can be easily improved and should be very much improved through the publishing process, right? A manuscript doesn't appear on the pages the way it was first written. It goes through multiple rounds of editing. And so that's something that sort of the process takes care of it.
Okay, so I'm good at a lot of things. I'm an entrepreneur. Maybe I haven't quite figured out exactly my entrepreneurial path yet. I'm really good. I've done a lot of things in my employee career. I've had a career for a decade, 2 decades. You and I have that story, but I did a lot of jobs. I got this promotion. I got that one. I worked in this department. I have a lot of skills. I've got a lot of great hobbies. How do I now pick a goal for a book when I'm so multifaceted and I'm so multi-talented and I could really do anything? So how am I supposed to find a book and make it such that it would be sellable? Like I could actually make revenue from it.
So I think that the first thing that I would say relates to the last thing that you said. Is your goal for the book to make money unto itself? That's a really important question for anybody that's writing a book. And to be honest, for most people, particularly people who are writing a single book, is probably not a realistic goal. Yeah, sure, there are examples of a first-time author their book hits, they make it onto the, like you said earlier, the New York Times bestseller list. And it's this amazing story of somebody who came from nowhere and their first book sells millions of copies. The reality is, for most people writing a book, particularly if it's a business book of the type that we're talking here, for most people, that goal, the revenue goal is more about selling work and using the book to sell work. That's not to say that there aren't authors who make a living writing and selling books at $20, $30 a copy. But where that tends to happen is through the release of multiple books. I look at a guy like Mike Michalowicz, who wrote Profit First, and he sells tons of books, but he's also got, I don't even know how many now. He's probably up over a dozen books. And what happens is that as you build an audience and people are following you, every time you publish a book, you're publishing it into that captive audience that wants to buy the next one. It takes a lot of time to build that sort of platform. So back to your question of, how do you come up with what is the right book to write? It goes back to thinking about what are your goals for it, right? Is your goal to generate leads for this business that you're launching or that you've already launched? Is it to build authority on a particular topic so that you're seen as the expert in that area? Is it just to codify your knowledge, codify your thinking on the topic so that you're clear in your mind and you can put something together that's productized and structured so that when you're talking about it to clients and partners and employees, it's something that has some structure to it, right? There's all sorts of goals that you can have for your book. I think it's important for the author to have a clear view of their business before they land on exactly what that book is going to be. Because absent knowing who your target audience is, right, your target customers, absent knowing what outcome your business is going to deliver for those customers or clients, and how you're going to go about doing that and what differentiates you versus others in your market, the risk is that you're going to write a book that may be a very good book, but it doesn't relate to what you're trying to do commercially in your business. And you want to make sure that you're not putting the cart before the horse and that you're not just filling your time writing a book before you even know what it is that you're going to do professionally in your business.
Yeah, so the concept of the end in mind and work backwards as opposed to work forwards, which most of us do, right? We start, I'm like, oh, okay, I know this topic, and then we move forward. But rather what you're suggesting is you work backwards. What is the end goal that you would like to achieve? Is it actually selling the book for the book's sake? As you said, it's very rare that works, but that it could be a strategy, or figuring out if you're looking to get more clients or you're looking for authority. So I totally love the fact that you have such a system in place. And I know that you have a system because I read your book, let me be honest, I'm reading your book. But the first full front of it is all about the little system, like your core business, the goals for the book, the business case, and the fact that you've got almost like worksheets in here that really helps. So walk us through, why did you write this book, other than I probably just promoted why you wrote the book, but why did you decide to write this book? And if someone is looking to or thinking and contemplating about writing a book, why is this a good step for them to just read your book first to even decide?
The first reason that I wrote it, and I shared a little bit about how I acquired Grammar Factory, I didn't start it myself, was there's this saying in the startup community around eating your own dog food, right? And it's the idea that it's very easy as a business owner, whether you're a founder or you acquired a business, to never go through the experience that your clients go through, and to never experience your product or service from the other side of the table. And so for me, it was very important to be able to put myself in the shoes of the people that we work with and know what they're going through when they're trying to get 50,000 words or even 30,000 words down on a page. For me not to understand how difficult that can be and not go through the process of editing and getting feedback from an editor and going through cover revisions and saying, oh, I like the typography, but I don't like the image, or the colors aren't quite right. That whole experience, it was important for me to understand that customer experience so that I could get a feel for what was working, what wasn't, and make changes to that.
The nugget that you just dropped around so many people, and for those of you listening and you're transitioning from employee to entrepreneur and you're trying to figure out your business or you're codifying more of your business, just that one nugget you said about being in your own business. So whatever it is that you do, be the recipient of it. So if you suddenly decide you want to be like a Reiki practitioner, figure out how to do Reiki on yourself. And I know that's possible that you can do as an example. What does that feel like to do it? If you want to be in a photography business, go and do a photo shoot because you probably prefer to be behind the camera than in front of it. But if you're taking pictures of people who are nervous about taking pictures and you're nervous, then you're going to understand that. So I think that's one of a massive nugget, the fact that you decided that I want to know what my author would feel like through this entire process from end to end. And whatever I'm going to teach in my book, I'm going to go through is so powerful. I think that's brilliant that you shared that and said that. And I think a lot of people miss that. I'm in the process of doing it right now. I'm an entrepreneur and transitioned from employed entrepreneur a long time ago, but I'm currently building another business and I'm going through all the phases that I teach in my own program and the doubts and the this and the managing my calendar and all the different components. And I'm like, but I feel like it makes me a lot more credible because I'm doing it again. I'm being a new entrepreneur all over again.
It really does, yeah.
It really changes how you go forward and deal with clients.
Yeah. It's easy, I think, particularly if you're a real expert in your field, to skip that step. And I think we've all had teachers or professors who were experts in the content, but weren't great at teaching it because they didn't really know what it was like to be in the shoes of somebody who didn't really understand the material. So yeah, it is very similar to that. And the other reason, I would say there's two other reasons that I wrote the book. Because I had acquired the business, it was a really great way for me to get up to speed on that whole end-to-end process of planning a book, writing it, publishing it, and then leveraging it. Because there are steps to that as a consumer of books, I was familiar with. As somebody who had worked in business and strategy, there were other areas that I was familiar with from that perspective, but I was not familiar with the entire end-to-end process. And in some ways, that's why the book, we were talking about this before we went live, it's a bit of the reason why the book is longer than it might otherwise, because I really wanted to cover that whole spectrum of strategy, then the writing piece, the editing, the publication, and then how you actually use the book in the end. I wanted to cover all of that so that I understood it. And that goes back to the codifying your knowledge and understanding. So that was the second reason. And then the third reason was it's a tool that I use all the time in the business to bring potential clients, authors along that journey so that when I sit down with them and have a conversation about publishing their book, they have an understanding of me, how we work, and it just makes that whole process so much easier. When somebody books in a publishing consultation, typically one of the first things I'll do is send them a copy of my book. And then when we have that conversation, it just flows so much more smoothly.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense because as I'm reading the front end, there were, as I've said, I would like to write books. I have drafts sitting on my computer of books that I've written.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people have this in their head too, but it feels there's all those, it's daunting. It's an imposter syndrome. Who's going to buy my book? Who's going to read it? Who's going to do anything? But I do love that you even have, and I didn't even think about this, but you've got this entire section on your book type. So once you've figured out what you're writing about or whatever things, but I love the fact that you've got 4 different types of books. And I don't even know if I really fully realized, even though I'm such a consumer of books, like I love reading and then I read a lot, but the how-to book, the list book, the essay book, the parable book, oh my God, I didn't even know that there were really that many. But as I thought about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I've read that kind of book. Oh, I've read that book. Oh, I read the parable book. Like I do know exactly what you're talking about for those people who are big readers, but why is even identifying the kind of book? So we've talked a lot about your position and codifying your intellectual property and not, but why is even the style of book that you've mentioned so important to think about?
There are a couple of reasons. One is very practical, is that the way that you write different types of books differs, and some are easier to write than others. And a very high concept, thought leadership, essay style book, like the type that Malcolm Gladwell might write, is a very difficult book to write. It requires a lot of research, a lot of iteration, a lot of skill on the part of the author to write in a way that is engaging. And those are often the books that you do see on the New York Times bestseller list. Right. By contrast, a list book is actually a pretty easy lift, relatively speaking. Structurally, it's a lot easier. And just for the audience's benefit, the way that a list book works is you have a variety of themes, right? Let's call it 5 or 6 different themes that topics are grouped into. And then you write a page or 2 about a topic that fits into that. And you can, as a reader, you can read individual items of that list individually. You don't have to read it from start to finish. You can look up in the table of contents and go directly to a topic and read that. And so structurally, it doesn't require the same level of expertise as a writer to write something like that. So from a practical perspective, choosing your book type and aligning that with what you're comfortable writing is a practical reason to do that. The
Well,
second,
sorry to interrupt you, but
sorry.
going to that, how would I even know which is the book that I should be like? Let's pretend that I'm a bit of an academia anyway. And so for me, and I read everything that I do that Malcolm Gladwell writes, and I love that. And I love that
Yeah.
style, and I have so much knowledge versus a made easier book like a list book. If I'm an entrepreneur and my goal is not to sell the book for the book's purpose, but it's to get clients, back to our earlier conversation, which I'm guessing most of the people listening to this, the only reason they want to buy a book, they want to write a book is to make more money. Since we've discovered that and established it's not really selling the book itself, it's the clients you're going to get. Why am I not picking the easiest route to market? But I want to write an essay book because I'm academically so smart.
Yeah. And you're going to, you probably already have, and you're going to hear this from me a lot. It goes back to what you're trying to accomplish with the book. And so if your goal, for example, is to, or let's say your business is a personal brand business, right? Your goal is to get speaking engagements, maybe some consulting off the back of that, but it's really about you as an individual. Your website is yourname.com. And then what you're probably needing to do is write a book that tells your story and makes people feel some sort of connection with you. And so a list book probably isn't going to accomplish that. A list book is going to be more technical, more itemized. What you really want is a book that tells your story, grips the audience, lets them know why you are doing what you're doing. And so for that type of business, the parable book, or sometimes that's called a memoir.
Okay.
The distinction there is both are a storytelling type of narrative. With a memoir, it's about your own personal story. With a parable, it's usually a fictionalized story that teaches lessons based on some sort of fictionalized narrative. Similar in terms of how they're written. But so for that personal brand, the memoir is probably going to be the most powerful way to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. Let's take another example. If you're a consultant and what you're trying to do is convince your prospective clients that you are credible, authoritative, and you know what you're doing, then a how-to style book might be the more appropriate one, where you can step the reader through your process for accomplishing a certain end goal that they have on your topic. But by contrast, if your goal is to change the public narrative on a particular topic, change how the market is thinking about it, change how regulators are thinking about it, then what you're trying to do is influence opinion. And to do that, you probably do need one of those big concept thought leadership books that really change the narrative on a topic. And so while it's a more difficult book to write, that probably is the one that you need to write for that. Going back to that, start with the end in mind. What is it you're trying to accomplish? And then back into what type of book am I going to write? Who's it going to be written for? And what's the end result that I want that reader to have at the end of the book?
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the practicality, and definitely in your book, you've got like worksheets and things that are very practical tools. But let's switch gears a little bit and just talk about what is the mindset a mindset shift that someone needs when they have to go from, okay, I have knowledge, I have an idea, blah, 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 to I'm ready to publish that information. Because it's good and fine to say, okay, I can fill in this mindset, I can fill in the worksheets, but it's beyond the practical part of it. It's like in your own head. So your authors that you've worked with, what have you noticed is the biggest mindset shift from their, hey, Scott, this was me and you. Hey, yeah, I have books in my head, but obviously I haven't gotten them out of my computer to a published format. What is that? What do you notice? And what is the major theme you've seen in that shift that people either need to have? How do they get it? Or how does it happen?
Like with a lot of things, it's choosing to do it. A book is, there's certain things you can just find time for off the side of your desk. A book isn't quite like that. You need to make time for it, particularly if you're going to do it in a way that gets you results within your business. And that starts with putting aside sufficient time to think about those strategic things up front before you sit down and start writing. And it doesn't necessarily need to take a lot of time, but you really do need to spend that time to think about why you're doing it, who you're writing it for, and getting clear on what is the central question that your book is going to answer for your reader about that topic that you're writing about. And that's critically important because that's the starting point for the entire structure of your book. And so getting into that mindset of answering a question for your reader on that topic, it's really important to get into that mindset because that's ultimately someone is reading a book because they want to find something out, right? And they have a question in mind, and that's what's going to drive them to either buy or read your book. And that then provides the scaffolding for you to think about what then do I need to cover in my book to answer that central question. So spending a little bit of time thinking to properly answer this question for my reader, here are all the topics that need to be covered, then grouping those into logical groupings, thinking about the order that those need to appear in for your reader to properly understand the topic. Sometimes topics need to be covered sequentially, particularly if there's a process involved.
Right.
Sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes they can just be groupings of ideas, of topics, but there might be an order of importance that you need to think about. But once you've done that work of thinking about the questions that need to be covered to answer that central question and thinking about the order of them, that's really the starting point for the chapters of your book. And once you have that macro structure for your book, the real sort of pivot point that sort of turns that light bulb on for people is when I point out that each individual chapter in a book can be thought of as a mini book, where each of those chapters that you've then thought through, you can do that same thing. What is the central question that you need to answer in that chapter? And what are the subtopics you need to cover for your reader in order to answer that? And so then you've got your next level of structure for your book. And at that point, you just need to put in some bullet points, right? What is this topic about? Why is it important, right? What are the benefits of your reader understanding it? What are the risks if they don't? And how can they take action on that particular topic? And if you do that for each of the subtopics in each of the chapters, my goodness, now you've got a really detailed outline for your book, what we call a book blueprint. And so from a mindset perspective, writer's block is no longer a problem because if you wake up at 5 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, you can sit right down at your laptop, bang out 1,000 words on that subtopic. You know exactly what you're going to cover. And before you know it, you've got 30,000 words written over a month or two. And that mindset of being a writer, answering questions for your reader, putting in the time, doing that on repeat, that's how you get a book written. It's not just by saying, I'd love to have a book and then I'll find the time to do it.
Yeah, and that leads me into two more points. One is your point just now is to say your identity. I am an author, as opposed to I write a book. And I've read in many different places is that when you can change your identity, there was, and I've forgotten now who said it, but when you can change your identity, so instead of saying I don't smoke, as opposed to I'm not a smoker, or
Yes.
I go to the gym, or I'm a fitness freak. I write a book versus I am an author.
Yeah,
And by changing, as you said, your identity around it, I
that's right.
think that you make that shift probably faster than any other mindset shift that you could possibly do.
Yeah, I think that probably was James Clear in
That's right.
Atomic Habits.
There was. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
correct.
As with so many things, right? Those little tidbits come from books.
Yeah.
Right? They stick in your mind.
Yeah, I love him. My favorite, one of my top 5 books of all time is Atomic
Agreed.
Habits. I'm totally going to give that credit for that one because I love it. I actually have on my YouTube channel an overview of what I learned from that particular
Amazing.
book. Get someone to, I'll tag that one in this as well. But okay, let's talk about now. Obviously, you're a publisher, you have a publishing house, but in the world of Amazon and KDB self-publishing and all these other things, walk someone through around the differences between self-publishing, the traditional publishing route, a hybrid. Like, why would someone want to do that? What is the difference? Because it seems like everything is DIY these days. You could do anything, you just press a couple of buttons. And I also want to touch on using AI and how people can use it and not use it without it being a problem. So let's talk about the differences in the different routes to market if someone actually wants to be an author and write a book.
Yeah, I refer to these as publishing models. And I like to bookend them by talking about DIY on one end and traditional publishing on the other end. First thing that I'll point out is there is no best way to get to market. But for most people, there's probably a right way based on, again, their goals, their objectives, and their expectations. And let's start with the DIY. It is obviously, maybe it's not obvious, it's the least expensive way to get to market.
Right.
And the reason for that is there are free tools that anybody can use to publish a book. And that has been a bit of a game changer because it democratizes what used to be a very gated industry where traditional publishers, which we'll talk about in a moment, were the ones who decided whether a book was worthy of getting to market, of getting on store shelves. What the self-publishing revolution has done is it's taken that decision and put it in the hands of the creators to make that choice about whether or not their content warrants getting to market. And it also, the other thing that it's done is it's taken the necessity of bookstore distribution away, where you can get your book to market through Amazon, through other online retailers, where anybody in the world can purchase your book. It doesn't require your book being on the shelf at Chapters Indigo or Barnes and Noble, and for people to somehow know about it and walk into the store, find it on the shelf, and bring it home, purchase and bring it home.
Which is lovely. There is something powerful about that, right? Because now you could write a book and someone in Australia or in Singapore or in the Scandinavian country can actually just read your book now that there's no way they're going to go around the corner to an actual bookstore and have to get it because they may never even get there, may never even get overseas.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's incredibly empowering for individual creators. And the problem with DIY is one of quality. And because it has been so democratized, and it's no different from any other area that's been democratized as well, there's a lot of, I think now when we're talking about AI, we call it slop, right? There's just a lot of junk that can be put into the market. And as a result, the shoppers and readers are a bit inundated with a lot of bad content, and it's difficult for them to sift through all of that. DIY publishing tends to work really well for authors who are publishing a lot of books, right? Particularly fiction authors who are maybe launching a book every month, right? They're really fast writers, and they develop a system for publishing high quality content. And that high quality can be relative. It depends on what your audience is looking for, but publishing something that is of the quality that your audience is expecting on a routine basis, right? It might be monthly, it might be quarterly, but what they've done is that they've streamlined that process so it's low cost for them as the creator. They do most of the work themselves, or they have a low cost way of getting covers designed, maybe they don't do any editing because they're a strong writer themselves, and they can just keep publishing books out very quickly. Where it tends to not work very well is for somebody who's publishing a single title or maybe 2 or 3. They don't have the time or the desire to develop the expertise to publish a quality book that's going to reflect the brand that they want to put out into the market. And the risk there is that if you don't invest in whether it's hiring designers and editors to do that work, then the risk is that you're putting a book out into market that people see and it's poor quality, and then that reflects on the quality of the work that you do. And so that's the caution on the DIY side. Let's go to the other end. The other end is the traditional publishing market, where they're not the only game in town anymore, but they are still considered a signal of quality, right? What the Simon & Schuster's and the Penguin Random House, what they do is they provide a stamp of approval, a guarantee that the quality of the product is going to be up to a certain standard. And they still play that role of gatekeeper. In order to be published through a traditional publisher, you need to get a publishing deal. Yes, you have to have a great concept for a book. That's table stakes. but you also have to come to the table with a platform. And what a platform is, it's basically an audience, or it's a way of assuring the publisher that when the book goes to market, there are people who will be ready to purchase your book.
Right.
And the threshold for a traditional publisher, it varies depending on the size of the publisher. I've heard 10,000 copies is the minimum threshold that they need to be assured that they'll sell. For a big name author like a Malcolm Gladwell or a Stephen King, that number is going to be a lot higher. And that's what justifies their investment in marketing and sales and marketing distribution. For most authors, the reality is you're probably not going to get a book deal from a traditional publisher, simply because most people are coming to this without that big audience, and they don't have a track record.
Right.
And so there's this area in the middle that some people call hybrid publishing, some people call professional service publishing. I think of a slight distinction between those two, but let me talk about professional service publishing because it's a bit of a pure model in between the two, where a company like Grammar Factory will provide all of the same services that a traditional publisher will do around editorial quality, design quality, publication and distribution, get the book to market in a high quality way that is, to the reader, it's going to be indistinguishable from what you would see from a big name publisher, a big five publisher. The difference is that the publisher works on behalf of the author in a fee for service model, a professional service provider does. And what that does is it takes the risk off of the publisher and allows the author to be the one deciding whether the book has relevance in the market and whether they can monetize it through their business. And it doesn't depend on book sales. A traditional publisher, they make money every time a book sells. For most of the people that we're talking to right now, that's not how they're making the money. And so that's why a traditional publisher won't take the risk on it, because they're not going to see that back in terms of book sales. If I publish a book and I make $100,000 from consulting fees, but I only sell 150 books,
right,
that's not a great proposition for the publisher, but it's a great proposition for me as the business owner. So I'm the one that's deciding, is this a viable book the way that I plan to use it? And so that's the role that a professional service publisher plays. And then I think about a hybrid publisher as living somewhere in between the professional service publisher and the traditional publisher, where there's some fees payable up front by the author, instead of where a professional service publisher shares all of the royalties back to the author. Maybe it's a 50-50 split with a hybrid publisher. So there's all degrees of variation in between those two models. But that's the big picture of the different publishing models.
Okay, that was so helpful. Thank you. Because I think we know the big publisher names. Most people do. If you know anything about books and you ever walk into a bookstore, and we know those names. But I think what's really interesting is that DIY world, like the Amazon types of worlds, where you've got the Kindle books and you're right, there's different DIY self-publishing, but just to understand the risk of what that is. And it's true, garbage out, garbage in. We have that. It happens all over social media. It happens even on YouTube videos. It happens everywhere, where you've got these people who are saying things, but they're not necessarily experts, and they're toting things out, and people are taking them for real. So I think it's really important to, if you want to keep your brand, and your name is your brand, and you want to have that high level, I think somewhere in between. So thank you for explaining so clearly the different kinds of models, so that someone can understand why you would want to do a DIY. I'll be honest, I have a book, but I don't have a book. I created a journal. This is on Amazon. It's a DIY with KDP Publishing. It's a guided journal for my entrepreneur friends. It's really easy. It was easy for me to do, but it made sense for me to put it through Amazon. Perfect. And have a DIY. It's print on demand.
Yeah.
I'm not having to worry about it. I don't really have to carry. I have some copies that I sell when I go to networking, but I don't have to worry about all of that. And it's done for me, but every page was essentially the same. It's not a book, it's a guided journal. So from my perspective, that was a really great DIY route to go. Whereas I now understand the purpose of a professional or a hybrid, and why the likelihood of my book would probably not get picked up by a really traditional publisher.
And look, there are some people who will publish books through different models depending on what they're trying to accomplish as well. I know some big name authors who published their first book Because they had a large social media following, they were able to get that book deal as their first book. Even though it's rare, it's not impossible. And they published their first book through a traditional publisher. For their second book, they decided to go with a service publishing option because they wanted more control over the time to market and the revenue on the back end and how they use the content. It just provided them a lot more flexibility. And because they had that audience in place, author platform, they were able to make that choice. And so that goes back to the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all question.
Yeah, it's a great thing to think about. It's a great thing for anybody listening who wants to write a book to ask that question. What is my best strategy to go, and why would I want to have different choices or different things? So that's great. Let's go back to the other question that I asked. It was a two-part question. Let's talk a little bit about AI, the ChatGPT, the cloud of the world, where I can use these technologies to help draft the book up. I can do it. We hear this all the time, even with students and high schools and universities, where kids are going in and writing essays and assignments using AI. This is like just a bigger extension of that thing of a student doing. So walk us through when to use AI, when not to use AI. Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And in the publishing world, what are you seeing as the trend because of it? And how do I know that it's real? How do I know that what I'm reading is written by Scott Macmillan and not Claude Macmillan?
Yeah, it's getting increasingly difficult, I think, particularly for readers to know for sure. I think we're in a bit of a silly era right now where it matters. And ultimately, I think we're going to get to a place that is similar to where we got to when computers first came on into the world, where at first people were probably asking, did you use a computer for that? And now that's really not a question. Or maybe, I don't know if accountants were asked at one point, oh, yeah, but did you use Excel for that? And they're like, oh, no, even though they were using it off to the side. I think it's increasingly going to just become part of how we work generally. But at the moment, what I'm seeing is a real split between people that are using AI poorly, who are abdicating the responsibility for thinking to AI. On the other end of the spectrum, there are people who are refusing to use it. They think it's cheating. They think that if they're using AI in any capacity, that it's not authentically their work. And then I think there's the folks in the middle that are largely trying to use it right. Some are being more successful than others. And the people in the middle there, I think that's where we need to get to, where AI is acting as our assistant, our collaborator, that we're working with AI in the same way that we might work with a research assistant or a co-writer, where we are taking the lead for shaping all of the strategic elements around the book, right? Who is it written for? What are we trying to accomplish? What is that central question? How are we going to then embed the book into the business in a way that achieves the goals we want to achieve? And then we're using AI to help flesh that out a little bit more, pressure test some of our thinking around it. And at times, yes, drafting content, but not as the first pass, right? The first pass really needs to be that thinking that I talked through earlier around building that book blueprint, that structure that answers that central question for the reader. And if you've done that hard work of thinking through what is it that the book's going to cover and why is it covering that? It's covering those materials because you already thought about what you're trying to accomplish, who the reader is, why you chose that reader, right? Because it's the same profile as the people that you're serving in your business. All of that important thinking has to happen before the content then gets drafted. And then if you've done that hard work, then if you take a section, you paste in your bullet points into Claude or ChatGPT and you say, okay, let's flesh out this content a little bit. Then what you're getting back is authentically your thinking. You've not abdicated responsibility for all of that to the machine. But the other part that's important that is a little bit more difficult, although I'm finding increasingly people are finding ways to make sure that their authentic voice is coming through in the writing.
Yeah.
but it's hit and miss. I find a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, some of the manuscripts that we're getting are really high quality in terms of the ideas. And it's clear that the author has not just pulled stuff from ChatGPT,
Yeah.
that they've actually gone through that effort of thinking through their intellectual property, and it's a reflection of the work they do in their business. But the tone, the voice, you can just tell it's flat, because you can tell that it was generated by AI. And that's a little bit of a harder thing to solve if you're not creating some sort of voice persona
Yes.
using material that you've genuinely, authentically created without AI. My worry is that particularly people that are first starting out and don't have a catalog of blog articles and podcast episodes and all this content that they've genuinely created themselves. And I'm going to pause. Every time I say genuinely, I keep thinking that now I'm being written by Claude, because Claude uses genuinely all the time now.
So true.
I'm going to have to get rid of that in my vocabulary. But so my worry is that without that base of authentic content,
Yeah.
that there are going to be people who just don't have that, and their voice is not going to be present. So I think it's really important to spend the time writing and creating things that are authentically yours, that you're not using AI to do, so that you understand your own voice, and that the audiences that you're talking to know who you are, and that you don't sound like everybody else who's using the same tools to create content. You know, even if you are using it, needs to have your own voice. And that's the thing that I think we risk missing if we abdicate too much on the content creation side even.
That's amazing advice. It's so true. And I think that bridge of the AI, I think so many people are fearful of AI, and it's going to take away my job, and it's going to, and I understand the notion. I think you and I are old enough to have lived through the Y2K days, where it was like, oh my God, it's the year 2000 and robots are taking over, and
The world's going to end.
Nothing happened. We're all still here. It's all great. And I think there's a lot of that fear mongering around this. But I think if you can use it as the research assistant, as your assistant, as if it was your executive assistant, it was the personal maid, if you want to say, whatever it is that you're using it for, but you're using it in a way that's as an assistant to you, as opposed to a replacement of you. I think that also, you're right, sharing your voice, making sure you understand how to upload things that they've done so it starts to get to know you, which seems scary, but it'd be no different than if you actually hired an assistant to help co-author a book. You would want
That's right.
that person to read, and I think they're called, like, they're ghostwriters, right? There's a concept of ghostwriters that write for actual big authors, maybe chapters or parts of the book, but has to sound to the reader like there was not a different person who wrote the book somewhere halfway in chapter 28. All of a sudden I'm like, who's writing this?
Yeah, that's right. And we do that type of work. We do ghostwriting, and that's exactly the type of thing that we do at the outset of a ghostwriting engagement, is create a voice profile, not an audio voice profile, but a written voice profile based on content that has been authentically written by the author, and based on conversations that we've had, interviews that we've had with the author. You get a feel for the way that they talk about things, whether it's more technical or more informal, whether they're talking about their own experience or they're talking about things that they've observed out in the wild.
Right.
All of those things play into your unique voice that is not the same as anybody else. And that's what audiences want, right? They can get a lot of this information from anywhere. They want authentic voices that have a unique perspective on ideas.
Absolutely. All right. As we close out, I'm going to ask you one more question, which is, what happens if somebody listening to this has a book idea and they know they've been wanting to do it, they've been talking about it for a long time, but they've been procrastinating? What would you tell them for the next 30 days they should do to stop procrastinating and going? Give me a game plan, especially someone who's very busy. Like, a lot of my audience they still have a full-time job. They're doing the transition. They're a parent. They've got kids. They've got parents that they take care of, whatever. They've got already a busy life. They have 18 things they're already doing, and it's not even 9 a.m. What's a 30-day game plan to get someone out of that procrastination and really moving forward if this is what they want to do? They want to be an author.
I'm going to suggest that it not be 30 days,
Okay.
that it be an hour.
Oh, okay.
I think the best thing that you could do, if that's what you want to accomplish, just spend an hour and get really clear on why you want to write it.
Okay.
The problem with putting 30 days out there is you could actually write a book in 30 days, but the risk is that you're not going to. And I think that the small, powerful step of really clarifying in your mind why you want to write the book. Think forward 9 months from now. Imagine your book is written and in the market 9 months from now. What is that going to look like for you? How are you going to use it? Let's imagine you've got a stack of 50 copies of your book right next to your desk. Who are those going to? Are you sending those to podcast hosts? Are you sending them to prospective clients? Are you taking 10 of them to your local bookstore and asking them to put them on the shelves, right? All of those things can be really powerful depending on why it is that you're writing, what you want to accomplish from that. And so getting really clear on that, it's not going to take 30 days, right? It can take as little as an hour, but having that in your mind, then that clears the decks that all of the other decisions come a lot more easily. And if I was to tell listeners what to do with the next hour after that, once you've landed that, think about who your book is written for and what that central question is. And if you've got those three things lined up, all the other dominoes are going to start to fall into place. And if somebody wants to bat ideas around, get those three things in place, and then let's have a conversation. I can help you map out the rest of it.
That's awesome. And I can't give about more of a plug. If you really are looking to be an author, this is a great blueprint. Even if you're just reading the first 100 pages, Scott really outlines a lot of the things that he's talked about today in this book. If author is one of the things you would like to have on your repertoire and want to figure out how the end goal, the purpose, what the audience is for, why you want to do it, even this first 100 pages of his book is going to help you so much. And then take that hour, read the book, and then book a meeting with Scott. Scott, thank you so much for your insight. This was an awesome interview because I think a lot of people think about this stuff and want to do it and they feel fearful. And I think you've cleared up a lot of things on just even how to move forward.
Anita, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I love what you're doing in the employee to entrepreneur space. It's such a great journey for people. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and thank you for the chance to speak.
Amazing. Thank you so much for everything. In the show notes, you're going to get all the details of how to reach out to Scott, how to get a hold of his book. And if you have any questions, of course, reach out. Thanks, everyone. See you in the next one.
Thanks for watching. Hopefully you were inspired just as I was by our amazing guest. Please subscribe because every week we will be interviewing someone else who's made that transition from employee to entrepreneur. In the comments, please share the one nugget that you heard that will change your business as well.